plainly perceive that we are growing, and today understand something about this chapter that we did not understand yesterday or the day before that. And tomorrow we will make another step forward in understanding Bible verses that we did not understand yesterday, so that on through our life we may plainly perceive that we grow in the same. How many of us do that? I find myself rebuked in the pastoral ministry. I fear that many of us think growth, but you know what we do when we think growth? I've got to read more books. Read more books. And so we read more paperbacks and more theology books, and we buy more books, thinking that we will grow thereby mainly. Edwards' exhortation is, this ought not to be so. That is, we ought not to neglect a plan of faithful daily biblical study while tricking ourselves into thinking that we are growing by reading what other people have said about the Bible rather than studying it for ourselves. Study the Bible so steadily. Note these words. He never threw a word away. So steadily, constantly, and frequently, that you may clearly perceive. Don't guess at it. Don't say, I assume I've grown over the last 8 years of my ministry. Do you see growth? Do you know things about God today that you didn't know 5 years ago? Is the vision clearer? That's admonition number 2. Number 3, Edwards exhorts us to redeem the time and to do what our hand finds to do with all our might. Now I'm moving towards methodology. Edwards exhorts us to redeem the time and to do what our hand finds to do with all our might. So you can see the progress. The first one was labor and be single-minded in your occupation with spiritual things and God. The second was do it in the Bible mainly. And the third now is what kind of lifestyle and study procedures go into making this happen. Resolution number 6, when he was a boy or a young man, resolved to live with all my might while I do live. I remember reading that in seminary and just a fire went through my heart. That just nobody seemed to be saying that to me. Don't coast! Get rid of the television. Work! Come on! Life is short. Do something. There's just so few people that seem to say that to us. Resolution number 5 was similar. Resolved never to lose one moment of time, but to improve it in the most profitable way I can. Now, he was a great believer in doing what you could do in the time you have to do it, rather than putting things off to a more convenient time. Universal human disease, procrastination. Resolution number 11, I believe, is the key to his theological accomplishments. Resolved. When I think of any theorem in divinity to be solved, immediately to do what I can towards solving it, if circumstances do not hinder. How many times in your devotional life have you bumped up against a problem in a psalm? And the Psalms, they're supposed to be prayerful, and I just see so many problems to be solved in the Psalms. How many times do you get up off your knees, open your concordance, take a piece of paper or a journal, and start writing possible solutions? We can develop terrible habits of neglect if we don't do that. We get used to unsolved problems and have no inclination or to just turn it over to the Packers of the world. He's the problem solver, and we'll read his book. What a terrible habit for a pastor to form as a shepherd of a people. Edwards was not a passive reader. He read with a view to solving problems. Most of us are cursed with a penchant toward passive reading. I just praise God for Dan Fuller at Fuller Seminary, who taught me the difference between passive and active reading. We read the way we watch TV. We don't ask questions when we read. We don't ask why this sentence follows this sentence. Of course, you'd never finish the book, right? And you're told by 10,000 teachers, finish 20 books in this semester. I rarely assigned more than one book in a semester when I taught. I saw these teachers assigning stacks of books, and I went up to the teacher and I said, "What are you doing? Do you realize what you're training those students to do?" Well, he didn't believe in it. I said, "Just take one great book and show them why one sentence begins with therefore, and another begins with but, and another begins with although." If they don't learn to read like that, they'll be superficial their whole life long. We don't ferret out the order of thought. We don't ponder over the meaning. We just, hurry, get this through, because I can tell the pastor at the next meeting, "I've read Packer's latest work," or Colson's latest work, and we feel like we've accomplished something because we can say we've read a book. We haven't read a book at all. We've looked at black marks on a page and pronounced syllables. If we see a problem and we are habituated to leave it to the experts and not tackle a solution for ourselves, our people will know what sort we are. They'll know. That's why there's so many weak churches. People don't respect their pastors. He's not a thinker. It's so thin what we're getting on Sunday morning. He hasn't spent any hours over that. I can think of 5 problems with what he just said, and he doesn't pose any of them. But Edwards calls us to be active in our minds when we read. A pastor will not be able to feed a flock with rich and challenging insight into God's Word unless he becomes a disciplined thinker. Almost none of us does this by nature. We have to train ourselves to do it. You know the best way to train yourself to become a reflective reader of the Bible and other books? Read with your pencil in your hand. This was Edwards' key. He read with pen in hand. From the time he was little, he did this. Let me read you Dwight's description. Even while a boy, he began to study with his pen in his hand. Not for the purpose of copying off the thoughts of others, but for the purpose of writing down and preserving the thought suggested to his own mind. This most useful practice he steadily pursued in all his studies through life. His pen appears to have been always in his hand. From this practice he derived the very great advantages of thinking continually during each period of study, of thinking accurately, of thinking connectedly, of thinking habitually at all times, of pursuing each given subject of thought as far as he was able, of preserving his best thoughts, associations, and images, and then arranging them under their proper heads, ready for subsequent use, of regularly strengthening the faculty of thinking and reasoning by constant and powerful exercise, and above all, of gradually molding himself into a thinking being. All that comes from a pen. Now, I will never be and never have been an Edwards, but I owe all of the clarity that I ever had to 30 volumes of journals began when I was a sophomore in college. Write, brothers, every day. Write, write, write in your journals, in your notes, on envelopes. I was walking by the Twin Towers over here, coming over here the other day, thinking about Edwards and trying to sustain a sequence of thought about a psychological problem one of my parishioners had. It takes 8 minutes to walk to this church. I'm going to sustain this thought for 8 minutes. I will pose a question and try to answer it. If a problem is posed by the answer, I will then try to answer that. And if a problem is posed by that, I will divide it into 2 and try to answer those. I couldn't do it. I saw something on the ground and started thinking about that wrapper. I saw this new building over here and started thinking about the challenge there. I couldn't do it. I can't. Only a few geniuses in the world can sustain a sequence of thought longer than a minute without a